When you dare to share, you break the silence. When you dare to share, you speak your truth. When you dare to share, you use the full strength of your voice. When you dare to share, it brings opportunity to own your story. So tell it, be heard, and at the same time, your sharing is someone else's learning, inspiration, motivation, empowerment, and hope. There's always an element to each of our stories that remains a secret. For some, we feel it's a dirty little secret. Dare to share your untold story exposes these secrets in a welcoming and positive way. I encourage each of you out there to dare yourself to share what is yours to tell. When we dare, it is the courage to do something really important. Let this be a vow to each and every single one of us that we take risk, we brave, confront, and face what is, while inspiring and empowering all communities. So let's break that silence and tap into mental beauty. This is Salima Jadabji, your podcast host, a practicing social worker, and your mental wellness connoisseur. Welcome to the Dare to Share Your Untold Story podcast, episode number 62, The Contrast, Losing Hope on the Inside, Yet Some Could Only See the Perfect Life She Lived. To all my fellow listeners, before we get started, I'm just dropping in a note to give you a heads up that this podcast might be emotionally triggering for you. We do invite guests onto the show who share openly about extremely difficult life moments with exposure and impact of what the struggles have been like. The intensity of each episode could have a variable impact on your emotional and mental well-being based on your own personal story. If at any point the topic becomes uncomfortable or upsetting to you in any way, please do not pressure yourself to listen. Instead, be kind to yourself, do some self-care, and perhaps give another episode a try. Today, I have the pleasure of introducing our courageous and daring guest, Sophia Old. Freelance writer Sophia writes trustworthy, compelling copy to help ambitious and leading health and medical brands connect with, educate, and inspire their customers and the public. Before pursuing her lifelong passion for wordsmithing, Sophia worked as a physical therapist for over 25 years. With a childhood love of literature, she mistakenly believed pursuing this pathway could only lead to a teaching career. A concurrent love of science and a desire to help people made physio a natural choice. But the writing urge never abated. So Sophia took the career switch plunge, completing studies in professional writing and editing and search engine optimization copywriting. She has since worked with national and global health brands, plus many small to medium-sized businesses. Sophia lives on the Sunshine Coast in Queensland, Australia, with her husband, 2 young adult daughters, and fur baby. She is fascinated by neuroscience and the intersection between health and technology. When she's not at her desk, you might find Sophia exploring one of the many local walking trails or beaches, or relaxing with a coffee and book at a cafe. She also loves scuba diving and has dived the Great Barrier Reef, Florida Keys, and Fiji Islands. Hey, Sophia. Welcome to the Dare to Share Your Untold Story podcast.
Thank you so much, Salima. It's wonderful to be here. It's a great privilege. Thank you for having me.
Oh my goodness. For me, Sophia, it is just so lovely to have you on the show today, and I'm super grateful that you've accepted to be a guest on the show and for your willingness to tell your story with what will be, I think, vulnerability. You know, I continue to be inspired as I chat with each guest that comes on the show. So far, guests have given me the opportunity to draw on their strength and wisdom and inspiration. With all the storytelling that I get to witness firsthand, it's just a beautiful exploration for me. So, Sophia, it's incredibly important that we take a stance together to help break barriers of mental stigma.
Couldn't agree more, Salima.
Yeah. And so, Sophia, in case you're still wondering, in terms of this podcast, it's all about bringing forward untold stories that people go through. So whether it's directly about a mental health struggle or something else. And one thing that we know is that no matter what the person's story is about, there is impact on one's own mental health in some way, which remains unseen and tucked away. So today, my hopeful mission, it's really that you and I expand this vital message and give encouragement to people to share and tell what individuals typically have reservations for expressing. And of course, I'm bringing forward a trend. It's called the mental beauty rethink. Sophia, what's the first thing that comes to mind when you hear this phrase, the mental beauty rethink?
It's such a great question and something worth pondering. For me, I'm a Christian, and thinking about that, I believe that God has given us both the capacity to appreciate beauty as well as beautiful things to enjoy. So when we look around, we've got beautiful sunsets, we've got beautiful sunrises, trees, national parks, and there's great beauty in those. But there's also beauty in ocean storms and waves crashing on the beach, things that are a bit more wild and untamed and out of control. And when I put those things together with your mental health, your mind, there's beauty in the capacity to appreciate life when things are going well. We know the sun rises and sunsets, but there's also beauty in the storms and the wild times. And if we can use our capacity to appreciate the beauty in all those things, I think there's a
Mm-hmm.
lot of growth and learning
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
enrichment of our lives.
Yeah, that's so well said. That's really the essence of, I think, where I was going with it is just to really invite people in to sort of embrace the beauty and the imperfections. And I think you've captured it so well by talking about it. We can find beauty when things are going well, when things look nice, when things are calm. But the wild times and the storms, there's a lot of beauty in there too, right? Like beauty in storms. We see artwork that we've had mistakes made, but then it's like, oh, that turned out better. They're pleasant mistakes, pleasant surprises. So I very much agree with your statement, and I appreciate your wisdom and how you've expressed this. That's pretty great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Sophia. So let's get that raw conversation of ours started. I hope you're as ready as I am.
I'm ready to go.
Okay. All right. Awesome. Not like I'm trying to scare you or anything. you know, we're just tapping into the unknown parts of your story and see what comes up. It's more of an encouragement. Let's be curious together. Okay. Sophia, give us the newspaper headline of how you would title your untold story. How would it read?
I would say behind the perfect facade, I was falling apart inside.
Behind the perfect facade, I was falling apart inside. Is that correct?
Correct.
That's a bit of a teaser. Can you say a little bit more about that?
What that means is that on the outside, my life looked perfect to everybody around me, but on the inside, I was really struggling with some dark feelings of hopelessness and despair.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so the outside view and the inside view were very different.
Right, exactly.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, then, without further ado, tell us more. Let's unpack that untold story. Tell us about what this perfect life looked like while there was all this struggling in disguise. Tell us more.
Sure. So I was in my mid to late 20s, and from an external perspective, my life looked pretty perfect. I come from a loving family, raised in a loving home where my parents would have done anything for me, had a good education, been to
Mm-hmm.
university. I had my physio career, which was going
Mm-hmm.
well,
Mm-hmm.
lots of friends, a good social life. I was healthy.
Mm-hmm.
So from the outside, everything would have looked like I had it all. And yet on the inside, I was really struggling with these feelings of worthlessness and hopelessness and just
Mm-hmm.
meaninglessness in life.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, that's right. The inside and the outside pictures were complete contrast.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So, on the surface, your life looked great, but there was all this suffering that you were experiencing, this sense of feeling miserable on the
Mm,
inside. How did you manage to keep that image up for people to continue to see you externally as having that perfect life?
Yeah, it's a great question. It was very hard work. I could hold it together while I was at work. It was kind of a huge effort to drag myself out of bed each day, to be honest, and put on the brave
Mm-hmm.
face. There's this thing of putting on a brave front and going
Mm-hmm.
to work, doing what I had to do. And then at home, I would be crying, even throughout the day, just in my own mind. There was a lot of dark thoughts
Mm-hmm.
and probably behaviours too. Like, I know I'm a bit of a comfort eater, an emotional eater, so I would
Mm-hmm.
overeat at times. And there were still good moments. It wasn't all darkness. Like, seeing
Mm-hmm.
friends was a highlight, and
Mm-hmm.
I could still take pleasure in some of those activities. But I
Right.
started to isolate myself as well and spend the time with friends and doing things that I enjoyed. So even though it looked like I was holding it together, I guess things were really spiraling out of control to the point where that was getting more and more difficult to do.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so when it started to get difficult, did anyone start to notice that something changed, or did you continue to mask up and really try to hide behind what was going on? Like, did you feel like someone was paying attention, or did you even reach out for help at first, or did you just keep writing the emotions that were coming up as they came up?
I kept the mask on for a really long time
Mm-hmm.
before I eventually reached out to get help. So I think a
Mm-hmm.
lot of people would have had no idea what was happening. I got pretty good at hiding. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So you did mask up for a long time. So at what point did it become noticeable on the outside?
Mm, I'm not really sure, but possibly my family might have noticed that I wasn't myself. I did at one point talk to them about what was going on, and they suggested that I should see the doctor, and get some help.
Mm-hmm.
But even then, I continued to hide from other people what I was going through. There was a
Mm-hmm.
lot of guilt and shame about
Mm-hmm.
feeling the things that I did, and that guilt and shame was a real hindrance to getting help. And the fact that my life was so good and I was blessed with so many good things, I felt really ashamed that I felt
Mm-hmm.
the way that I did. I felt very guilty that, I had no right to be feeling that way. So that was a big hindrance from seeking help and a big driver behind trying to maintain that facade, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so when shame would be in the driver's seat, what would it look like for you? What did it stop you from doing?
Hmm. For a start, it stopped me from reaching out and trying to get some support because I
Mm-hmm.
felt ashamed that I was feeling the way that I did. And it limited me from recognizing even that something was wrong. I mean, I knew something was wrong, but there was this real conflict, internal conflict between knowing something was wrong and feeling like something shouldn't be wrong, that I had no right to feel this way. And there were other people who were going through so much more than what I was, whose lives were difficult. So it was okay for them to be having these kind of feelings, but it wasn't okay
Mm-hmm.
for me to feel that way.
Mm-hmm. It's kind of like you're telling me like you weren't really giving yourself permission to feel, and the deep feeling of shame was really rooting all of that non-permission.
Mm. Yeah, non-permission is a good word for it. Yeah,
Yeah.
non-permission, non-acceptance
Hmm.
of myself and what was happening with me.
Yeah. And so how long did this go on for?
It went on for maybe a year to 18 months before I started to get some help.
Right. Okay. And when you were mentioning how you finally were able to tell your family or your parents about what you were going through, and they encouraged you to reach out for supports. You mentioned that, it was really hard for you to share those things with other people, and you really kept it from others. I'm just curious about how that affected you in the sense of feeling this sense that I can't say anything, that not giving yourself permission. I think that comes up again, right?
Right.
How were you affected by that?
I probably coped with it in unhealthy ways, binge eating, wild partying, binge drinking, doing crazy things. Possibly some of those behaviours were a cover up. Maybe because I just spent so much, I feel like I spent so much energy and effort
Mhm,
dealing with this conflict on the inside that
mhm,
sometimes I would just go completely opposite and go completely out of control, yeah,
mhm,
and do crazy stuff.
mhm. This internal conflict, if you were to give it some kind of a description or describe it as some sort of a shape or a color or even combined with words, how would you describe it?
I feel like the depression was a little bit like being put into a great big tank, like those escape artists get put into a great big tank of water,
Right?
except the water is like this dull, murky grey, and you're in there and you can see out and you can see the world going on around you and people doing things and having fun,
Mhm,
and you desperately want to be a part of that, and yet you can't get out of the tank. You're just stuck
mhm,
behind those four walls, and even
mhm,
though you can see what's going on out there around you, everything's coloured by that grey, murky, yuck fluid. So your perception of reality is different, and in a way you're sort of desperate to get out and be a part of that, but in another way there's just this overwhelming desire to just sink down in the grey and let it consume you, and just not have to face anything, just to let that grey water go over your head and drown you basically.
mhm. And did you feel like you were drowning?
Yeah, I did at times. I felt hopeless, I guess. Yeah, hopeless and worthless, and just that everything in life was meaningless.
Right. It's a really interesting picture that you paint. It's so descriptive and there's so much richness in its description. And I think that that might resonate with a lot of listeners who might have experienced depression themselves or are currently experiencing it right now.
Mm.
So I'm curious, is there anything else about your untold story, having gone through this bout of depression and going through all of the emotional aspects of it? Is there anything else that you can say about how you were affected by it?
Mm.
Were there any themes that repeated in your life or things that you really found you were impacted by as a result of going through this?
I guess another thing that was part of that journey was being a Christian. There are some people in the Christian community who say that someone with that faith shouldn't experience depression.
Hmm.
We should always be filled with hope and joy, and that's true, but
Hmm.
that added probably another layer of guilt and confusion.
Mhm, mhm.
In terms of themes, it did impact relationships and definitely led to me making some pretty dumb choices in some of the things that I did.
Mhm.
I was fortunate that none of those had really serious negative connotations, but certainly
Right,
some of the things I did with binge drinking and partying, potentially could have had some worse outcomes. I was just
right.
fortunate that, I used to do dumb things like getting in cars with men I didn't know and crazy stuff that could have had way worse outcomes, I think, just as a way of dealing with what I was feeling.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Interesting. Okay. And so it's interesting how faith and religion and culture and just even the society or community that we grow up in, how that really does influence
Mm.
what we experience internally and the narratives that we create for ourselves based on the belief systems. You talked about this added layer that really didn't help the guilt and the shame for you to be able to work through that. It's interesting how these things kind of come into play, and it's important for us to be mindful about how we are interpreting those aspects, as well as how we might be contributing to someone else who might be creating a narrative for themselves based on something we might say or do in relation to culture, cultural norms, or belief systems. Because I find it fascinating when I speak to different people and we talk about it's not just my experience, but then it's these layers of my culture, my faith, my religion, the groups that I belong to, and how people see me and how people
Mm.
view certain things. Do you notice those things more and more for yourself as well?
Probably, yeah. That's a really important point too, Salima, that our mental health, it doesn't exist in isolation in our mind. It is impacted by so many of those layers, and it is
Hmm.
so culturally determined. And there were other people who shared a faith with that were very encouraging and prayed for me and were very helpful and positive and accepting of where I was at.
Right.
And now, I guess it's that faith now is more a part of my life, a stronger part of my life.
Hmm.
And I guess I'm a bit older and have more experience, and perhaps I'm a little bit better at stepping aside from what other people might think or say. Not that it doesn't
Right.
influence me at all. There's, that ability to be able to step apart from that and say, well, is this true? Is this right? Is this helpful? Or is it unhelpful?
Right.
For me right now, that's important.
Yeah. And it sounds like you have the skills to be able to take the time to decipher and reflect and pause and think about it for a second, what you were experiencing in that time period. And what I know that other emerging young adults and even teenagers, young adults, these individuals, they're still heavily influenced by things that are happening in the external part of the world and externally in their world. So it's interesting to get your take on that. So, Sophia, when people come to see me for therapy, individuals are typically in one of three places in their journey. Some people are getting started, where they're coming to me and they have a whole bunch of things they need to figure out or talk about, or they don't even know where to start. Some people are in the middle of their journey, where they're in the thick of things, or something acute has prompted them to seek support, knowing that they now have to unpack some of the other parts of their life. And some people are looking back, where they might be in a more of a space of like personal growth or reflecting, attempting to transition into a different chapter in their life. So maybe they're looking for some closure. Where would you say that you are on your journey? Would you say that you're getting started, in the middle, or looking back?
Mm. I'd say I'm at the point now of looking back. So that episode I talked about, where just for a long time I felt like I was drowning in that big
Hmm.
tank of grey water, that was in my 20s.
Hmm.
Then I had a good period for a while after I got some help and I was on medication. And then I did have another pretty bleak time after the birth of my second daughter that seemed to trigger
Hmm.
another depression episode. And
Hmm.
that she's now 18. So I passed that again. And yeah, I guess I feel like I'm in the looking back phase, but
Hmm.
I'm also mindful that it's not troubles with your mental health are not something that you just get over and get on with your life. There's always that possibility that another episode might happen, and
Hmm.
I'm, I guess, a lot more mindful about doing things to protect my mental health and really keeping that as a high priority in my life. I
Hmm.
think there's so much talk about physical health and what we can
Hmm.
do, exercise, we can eat well, we can
Hmm.
doing those things to protect mental health.
Right.
Maybe in some ways even more important.
Yes. No, you honestly hit some really key points, and I'm so glad that you said them, right? So, not only did you say that you're looking back in terms of where you are on your journey, but I really liked these key points that you mentioned about being able to stay mindful that you can't just ignore your mental health. So, even if you recover or heal, you need to pay attention for signs and symptoms. And I like even some of the words that you use, like protecting your mental health. So to me, that's taking a proactive stance.
Mm.
When you said keeping it as a high priority, yes, absolutely. So it's not something that's supposed to be an afterthought or a reaction to something happening. Of course, yes, if something has happened, react
Yeah.
and do something about it. But there's so much that we can do on a preventative side of things. And so I really like how you said protect your mental health, like protecting your mental health and keeping it as a high priority really would be ways to be mindful of what's changing in my body, what's changing here, what is that about? So it really allows you to stay open and curious and keeping that balance and striking that balance between your physical health and your mental health.
Mm.
Well said. Thank you for saying those pieces. That's really great.
That's fine. I know that if I'm starting to get irritable with people or overtired or
Hmm.
even my diet, if I tend to start putting on a bit of weight, it's usually a sign that something isn't quite right and I need to pay attention.
Hmm. Right. That's amazing. That's like you're really learning your own signals, and that's really important. It's definitely something that you want to remember about the process of your healing journey because it's about paying attention to your own process.
Mm.
And so, Sophia, what would you say that you're grateful for with encountering this journey of your untold story, going through these moments of depression?
I'm very grateful that it triggered a change in my life. So, at one point when I was pretty low, I had a lovely friend that I worked with, a lovely older friend, and I still remember one afternoon after work, we were just sitting in a coffee shop, and I just opened up about what I was going through. And, I was really unhappy in my job. I hated where I was working.
Mm-hmm.
Some stuff happening there that was pretty unpleasant.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to travel, but I felt trapped too. And
Mm-hmm.
looking back now, that seems silly because I was young, I was single, there was nothing holding me where I was. But for some reason, I just felt really trapped in my life.
Mm-hmm.
And she was able to just wake me up to it was almost like a metaphorical slap across the face. It was like, Sophia, wake up, look at you, you're young, you're single, you could do whatever you want. You can quit
Right.
this job, you can go and travel.
Right.
And that conversation was like a turning point. So I
Wow.
guess I'm really grateful that I opened up. I then did quit that job and took off around Australia. I was going to do locum work and scuba dive right around the country and
Mm-hmm.
write about my adventures. I then got to Queensland. I was in Sydney at the time. I was born and raised in Sydney. Met my husband, and we've had our two kids. So I'm grateful that that episode. It was hard, but it took me out of a place, I don't know, complacency or feeling trapped. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm grateful that it forced me to change my
Mm-hmm.
life and
Mm-hmm.
what I was doing.
Right.
That it made me review my priorities, what was important to me in my life.
Mm-hmm.
It
Mm-hmm.
made me step out of my comfort zone, I guess. I guess I was
Yeah.
just comfortable there in Sydney, with my family and my
Mm-hmm.
friends, the people I knew. It led me to me stepping out of that.
Right.
And it's definitely made me grateful for the good times, the happy times, to really appreciate the little joys. Everyday life can be pretty mundane. We get up
Mm-hmm.
and we go to work and we cook and we wash dishes, but the little joys and gratitude for those things.
Mm-hmm.
I'm lucky to have dishes to wash. I could be in a country where I don't have food to eat to feed my children. So I'm lucky to have those dishes. I'm lucky to have clothes to wash. I'm lucky to have work.
Right. Yeah. So it really has sparked a lot of hope within you and really had you shift in seeing a lot of moments of gratitude that you otherwise might have been missing.
Yeah, that's right.
Hmm. Hmm. Okay. And so if we were to just shift back, we've been unpacking this untold story of this journey through depression and how it manifested for you and themes that have come up and how you were masking it and how it was seen on the outside and the struggles that you were having on the inside. I was hoping that we could take a moment to just really sort of narrow in on how your untold story, the journey with depression, affected your mental health. I know that there was a moment where you mentioned, you had a lot of dark thoughts, and there were some behaviors that I think you started to mention, like, you'd go partying and have a wild time with binge drinking or emotional eating. But I'm curious about the dark thoughts. And I know you also mentioned guilt and shame, which we kind of started to talk about. But I'm curious about what those dark thoughts were about and if you experienced any other emotions aside from guilt and shame that you might feel comfortable to express today.
Yeah, sure. There was definitely a lot of sadness.
Mm-hmm.
I would see something on TV or
Mm-hmm.
just have a thought and it would make me cry.
Mm-hmm.
A hopelessness to the point where there were days I'd be driving my car to work along the freeway and I would think, I just want to drive my car off the side of the freeway or over a bridge.
Mm-hmm.
And, that sounds really dark. And I didn't really want to die. Although sometimes I felt that that might be better
Mm-hmm.
for myself and everybody around me, but I had this idea that if I could somehow have a really terrible accident that meant I had to spend 6 months in bed in hospital, that I'd just be able to figure my life out and get myself sorted, which makes no sense. But yeah, that was just this kind of, I guess, hopelessness that I didn't know
Right.
what to do. And if I had this time, maybe I could work it out.
Okay, so this hopelessness that you talk about was never to have this intention of wanting to end your life, but this
Mm,
desire to just not want to be around anymore, not to live
mm,
that life with that kind of misery that you were experiencing.
right. Yeah,
And
yeah.
as you said, like, yes, I'm having a hard time grappling with this idea that this desire of driving over a bridge so that you'd be injured enough to get treatment and have it's almost like you're saying that you'd have a pause on life to work your life out. But it's like, hi, I'm just wondering, how that works out with the injuries and, you're going to be a little bit preoccupied with rehabilitation and things like that. And how do you get to decide what level of injury you're going to have with this accident? I mean, I don't mean to
Yeah.
make light of the situation,
Mm,
but I
mm,
think when you take a moment to look at how sometimes the perception that we hold and that you were holding, that there's so many inaccuracies.
mm,
And I know we were laughing about it just now, but it's a real serious issue and people go through this, right? It's that the thinking becomes irrational.
right.
And at that time, the desperation was so intense that it
Mm,
led you to places of thinking this way, that if I could just do this, if I could just do it this way, because I'm hearing that you were really yearning for a pause somehow, and that for some reason you couldn't give yourself a pause in any other way.
mm.
And that's what I took from that, even though we were laughing about it. But, we can do that in hindsight. But when you're going through it, I always look at what's that deeper piece there. Do you think that that was true for you, that that was the desperation you were in?
Yeah, you've hit it exactly, and I've never been able to clarify it like that before, Salima.
Hmm.
I was desperate, and yet I couldn't give myself permission. In theory, if I was thinking straight, I could have said, "Look, this is not good. I should not be thinking this way. Maybe I just
Yeah.
need to take a sabbatical
Yeah.
and take time out to figure it out." But I thought the only way to do that was to crash my car off a bridge so I could
Right.
get six
Right.
months in a
Right.
hospital bed. It's
Right.
completely irrational, and I was just so exhausted,
Mm-hmm.
probably from trying to hold
Mm-hmm.
everything together and put up this facade, that I just wanted to rest and I just wanted to reset and figure my life out. That, yeah, I was desperate enough to have those thoughts that that was the only way to do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's so exhausting emotionally, all of these thoughts and the different variation of and intensity of different emotions that you experience, it really does take a toll on the body. And
Mm,
when you're exhausted, you're really vulnerable. Even if someone
mm,
is physically exhausted, your body is vulnerable. So emotionally, the emotional muscles, if you think about your emotional muscles and think about all things on an emotional level, we can't see these things. And so when we're vulnerable, we're not able to see things clearly. And the perceptions are off. And as the parts that you're experiencing heighten, we're not getting a clear picture anymore. The clarity of mind is no longer intact. So I think this is really huge for people to really consider when you're in a place of desperation. Check your thoughts out. And this is probably a good time to talk about it and to also maybe get curious, like, hey, what is this thought that I'm having right now? What is this really all about? Does this really make sense? Or would this be good for me? What about this decision wouldn't be good for me? So that might help someone really bring themselves back to the present moment with a bit more of a reality check or a reality focus.
mm,
Yeah. So, Sophia, what is your key message to the listeners of our show? What do you want them to know?
mm. The most important thing is if you're having dark thoughts, if you're feeling hopeless, if you're feeling worthless, if you're feeling sad for no good reason, that's okay. It happens.
Hmm.
Don't be ashamed about that. And
Hmm.
that help is out there. You don't have to keep feeling that way. It
Hmm.
doesn't mean you're a bad person. It doesn't mean
Hmm.
something's wrong with you. But it is a signal. Something isn't right with your mental health, and it's a good time. Go and get some help. Talk to someone about it.
Hmm.
Yeah, seek support for that issue.
Yeah. So, no self shaming. If you're feeling these things, feel them. It's okay. There is help. You don't need to do it alone.
Mm,
You don't need to hate yourself for it. And I
mm,
really like how you use the message of, hey, just look at this from a fact place, a fact position. It's a signal that mental health support is needed right now.
You're not alone, like you said, Celine.
Hmm.
When you're in that dark place, you can feel very isolated. And maybe at the time, if I'd known that other people my age were going through this,
Hmm.
I would have gone, oh, okay, it happens to other people. I'm not alone in this. Yeah.
Right. I think sometimes when we feel the experience is unique to us, we also like single ourselves out more
Mm,
and ostracize ourselves
yeah.
from the bigger group. So it's really important for people to know you're right, that they're not alone and to connect with people, reach out, talk to someone, let someone know.
Mm,
I think something you said earlier was that we have choices.
mm.
Even when we don't know or don't feel like we have choices, we have choices.
Yeah, that's so true. Part of that thing of wanting to drive my car off the road was feeling like I had no choices, and it was like
Hmm.
that was the only way. But I did have choices. In the end, I chose to leave that job that I was in and go travelling. So it took that wake up call with that conversation with a friend to help me to see that.
Right. And sometimes for people, we have choices, but we might not like all the options that are there, but
Mm,
there's still choices. And so
mm,
sometimes we have to choose the best option from what is, and knowing that not any choice has to be permanent, but it would be better than where we are right now. And it could be a stepping stone to then the next opportunity of choices that could come up.
mm.
Yeah. So I'm curious. I'm always curious, Sophia. What what's that game-changing inspiration for you that you hold close to you that really reflects your untold story? Would there be like an inspirational quote, a book, an event, a person, something that really spoke to you that really invoked that kind of inspiration for you to sort of help you pivot or to keep your momentum in the place of the pivot that you were in?
Mm. Yeah, look, that's a great question. And that conversation with a friend was definitely a turning point.
Hmm.
In terms of an inspirational quote, there's a quote from the Bible, from the book of Proverbs, that I really love. And it says, trust in the Lord with all your heart and do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways, acknowledge him and he will make your paths straight.
Can you say it again? I want to take it in.
Yeah. Trust in the Lord with all your heart
Mm-hmm.
and do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways, acknowledge Him and He will make your paths straight.
Mm-hmm.
That means a lot to me because sometimes looking through our own understanding, we do get mixed up and confused, and knowing for me that there's a higher power that I can turn to who does have all the answers.
Mm-hmm.
It's a great comfort to not have to work it all out myself. There could be so much pressure on people to try and figure it all out themselves, and that just encourages me that I don't have to figure it out myself. And that when that talks about making your path straight, it doesn't mean, that you'll just have this cruisy journey through life where everything goes perfectly and there's no difficulties. I think, our paths are riddled with potholes and ups and downs and bumps, but the straight path takes us to the right destination. And
Mm-hmm.
that gives me great comfort that even though there's bumps in the road and hard times, that as I'm being guided, I'm heading to the right destination. So those potholes on the way are
Mm-hmm.
okay. They're a normal part of life, and just keep moving forward in the right direction.
Right. Right. It sounds like it's such a meaningful proverb, and I can see how it's really resonating for you and how you live your life. It's beautiful.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So, what's a cause or an organization that's been impactful to you on your journey that you'd like to give a shout out to, or an organization that really resonates with maybe if it wasn't available at the time, that's available now that you know would really help people given what you've gone through?
Yeah, sure. So there's a couple. One is it's called Beyond Blue. So
Mm-hmm.
that's an Australian organisation, and they have just great resources and support for anybody struggling with depression, as well as they're like a 24-hour helpline. If you're really struggling, you can call them anytime, and a trained counsellor can speak to you.
Mm-hmm.
And another one is called the Black Dog Institute,
Okay.
and they do a lot of great research into depression and mental health problems, and also have some great resources on the website.
Excellent. So Beyond Blue and the Black Dog Institute, those both sound super great, actually. That's really lovely. Thank you for sharing those. Yeah, shout out to Beyond Blue and the Black Dog Institute. That's great. Okay. So, Sophia, how can people connect with you if they would like to? How are you findable?
So I'm on LinkedIn,
Hmm.
and I'm also on Facebook.
And you've provided us your website as well. So we'll make sure that we include everything on the show notes page.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So, Sophia, guess what?
Right.
You've just dared yourself to share. Congrats.
Woo!
Yes. How was the experience for you?
Yeah, it was good. You've helped me to kind of even drill down into some things that I haven't thought through before, even after all this time. So that's really helpful. And if sharing my story helps one other person, for me, that makes it completely worthwhile.
Amazing. And for me, Sophia, I'm still just taking in this raw conversation that we just had. It was so important to hear you tell your story about the development of the depression that you experienced, how it manifested, how you grappled with it, and even how you really felt when you were describing feeling stuck and trapped.
Mm,
And, you took the time to share some of the deep pain you endured and the many complicated and roller coaster of emotions that you felt at that time. This story, I believe, is truly going to be so fruitful to so many individuals out there who are working hard to find their path and make sense of some of the tumultuous aspects of their own life journey. So, thank you for the deep conversation and for all your daring and all the sharing.
thank you for the opportunity.
Amazing. Once again, Sophia, thank you for being part of Dare to Share Your Untold Story and helping to be a voice in breaking down the barriers of mental stigma. To all of our listeners, if you like what you've been hearing on this podcast and you want to be part of breaking down barriers of mental stigma, I invite you to go wherever you are listening to the episode and hit subscribe. Leave us a comment or a review of the episode and maybe how you relate to it. To learn more about what we offer, visit www.daretoheal.co. And if you are feeling ready and brave to share, please submit your story by visiting www.daretoshare.co. Thanks for joining in.